So welcome back from your break. Now for our next panel, we have Building Diversity into Your Culture. It's going to be led by Luciana Duarte, Vice President Global Head of Employee Experience at Hewlett-Packard. This session will talk about how companies are building a culture that drives diversity. She oversees culture, employee communications, employee engagement, social impact, change management, and employer brand. With 25 years of experience, Luciana specializes in helping corporate leaders achieve business results by driving culture and engaging employees with their company, their colleagues, their communities, and their work through effective programs and communications. Luciana has twice received the prestigious International Association of Business Communicators Gold Quill Award. She has a BA in English and Anthropology from Amherst College, an MBA from Boston, both with high honors. She is married, loves to travel, and is happy to call Napa Valley her home. I think I'm starting a trend here. Sommelier, Napa Valley, vineyard. So a little fun fact about Luciana. She has a goal of traveling to 50 countries and 50 states before she's 50. And no, you cannot ask her how old she is. So without further ado, Luciana and panelists.
I was going to say, so therefore that means I have a really long time till I get to my goal. But I'm actually at 49 countries and 49 states at 49. So I think I'm going to make it. But anyway, buenos dias, buenas tardes, boa tarde, for those of you who, like me, may have Portuguese rather than Spanish as your background. I actually had a hard time picking a flag when we were provided with all of those options. I feel a kinship with many countries, but my original country is Brazil. So welcome to all of you, no matter where you may be from. We are all citizens of this wonderful world. And just wanted to start by introducing our esteemed panelists who I've had the pleasure of speaking with before, and I think will bring a lot to the table in this conversation. And by the way, the panelists who are not here are all of you. So let's consider this a real conversation. We want this to be a dialogue, and we're really looking forward to hearing both your questions and your insights and your ideas, because we're all trying to make sense of this together. So let me start with Steve Jarrett, who is at Oracle, and so therefore he is hosting us today. When we spoke last week in preparation for today's conversation, one of the things that Steve said was that he felt that senior leaders understanding that diversity isn't an initiative, but a priority, was a cornerstone of how Oracle's looking at D&I. So I wanted to start with that, Steve, and then have you introduce yourself.
All right, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I know you've been welcomed already on behalf of all the Oracle management team, and I feel a special kinship for a couple of reasons. One is I happened to be at the HITEC conference in Charlotte last year, which is where I'm based. And that was my first time, and I had a blast. So when David Ortiz mentioned coming back out to this one, I jumped on it right away. Now, the other thing about me that, anytime I start to hear about people being like 49 years old, stuff, see, now that I'm 60, because there was a time when you say, I'm probably the youngest person in the room. I think those days are long gone. So again, welcome. Certainly glad to have you here. But as Luciana said, one of the things that I think is important, and you'll hear me say it, and those who are in Oracle, especially part of OLA, our employee resource group, is that if D&I becomes a way that you do business, then you don't have to worry about it being a program or initiative, or in other words. So if you go away as a D&I practitioner and all the work goes with you, then you know you didn't really incorporate it into the way you hire, the way you staff teams, the way you recognize people, the way you decide who's going to lead projects, the way you decide who comes to events like this. This becomes a way you do business. And to the degree that I think businesses do that, and Oracle's starting to get a little bit better at it, Because we've got work to do. And I think, frankly, companies have been doing this for a long time would tell you that none of them are running victory laps on this just yet. But I think we're starting to gain some traction, and I do think it's a really important way to look at it and a way to frame it, because that way our leaders who aren't here understand it that much better.
Great point. Very well said. It's a shared accountability that we have. And closest to me, I have Zara, who is the VP of People at PagerDuty, a company that just went public in April of this year with 700 employees. So we really are running the gamut here in terms of size of organization that we are overseeing. And one of the things I thought was really interesting that Zara said when we talked last week was that even though they're at a very different point in their life cycle, they've addressed culture early on because they see it as a differentiator. So I'll let you talk about that, Zara.
Sure, and I'll introduce myself as well.
Please.
So my name is Zara, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. That's something that's really important. I have an immigrant background from England and Canada by ways of Tanzania, India, and Ireland. So, but you beat me in terms of flags. Right here, they almost, I know, it's not a competition. And I've lived in San Francisco since 2006, and I head up the people team at PagerDuty. So I'll take you a little bit about journey of PagerDuty because we're at a different stage than an Oracle and an HP. But some of the best practices are start your intentions early. So our company's been around for 10 years, and when Jennifer Tejada, our CEO, joined 3 years ago, she really wanted to make sure that we set the example of what the future of tech could be. And at that point, we were just couple hundred employees. And so we set the intention of addressing talent and culture just like you would set your intention of churn, right? Customer churn or customer differentiation of your product versus your competitors or your brand. So we really have made an intention on that, and we have values. We've weaved inclusion into our values, such as bring yourself and run together. And so an example of intention is we're growing by leaps and bounds. We're hyper-growth. Last year when we were looking at what our third hub was going to be in North America, one of our key areas that we focused on was diversity. Where is the diverse talent pool? So when we looked at it, that was one of our top 5, and that was sort of a stake in the ground. So we chose Atlanta. And so Atlanta has a diverse group of employees, lots of different access to different talent, and we've seen some immediate results from that. So that's the first thing, is be intentional, and you can be intentional at any single stage. I think the second one is around leadership. As you're building your leadership pipeline as an organization, or as you're, such as my company, we're hiring a lot from the outside, is be very intentional about what your leadership wants to look like, and push back if your pipeline isn't diverse enough. So one example is that when we bring in candidates, if we have 4 finalists, 50% needs to be from underrepresented groups. And so what we've been able to accomplish, and again, this is not about, we're doing better than everyone else, because most of our data does not show that. But we want our employees to look at our leaders and see that they can see themselves. So for example, 47% of our senior leadership team are females. 46% of managers and above are from underrepresented populations, and 46% of our executive team were born outside of the country. And our board, we have 3 females on our board. One is Elena Gomez, who's the CFO from Zendesk, and the other is the CTO from Gap, Rathy Murphy. So we've made intentional things, and sometimes these board seats have lasted open for quite a while, and same with our leadership roles, because we want to make sure. And then the final point is, because I'm coming more from a building perspective, is your people team. So when you build your people team are building employee experiences. And when you're building employee experiences, they need to represent your employee population. So making sure that your employee team represents all different backgrounds is really important. So we've taken those 3 angles as we're building our company and our culture.
I love it. We've hit the ground running, introduction, and we've started to cover some best practices. So to latch on to that, just to tell you a little bit about HP. So I'm sure you're familiar with HP, especially in Silicon Valley. We were the original 2 guys in a garage that started Silicon Valley right down the street in Palo Alto. And we are now in our 80th year as a company. They started in 1939. Now, 4 years ago, we separated from the mothership, HP Inc., and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise went their separate ways. We are HP Inc. We're the product company, the printers, personal systems, and our big bet, which is 3D printing and digital manufacturing. So that's what we focus on. And in order to deliver on that, we need to have people who are reflective of our customers, who are producing the products, marketing the products, selling the products, partnering with our partners. We need to be a reflection of our customer base. And so for us, diversity and inclusion is really a business imperative. It's not something separate from our business. It's how we do business. It's always been part of who we are, way back from the days when there wasn't even a name for it, in the Bill and Dave days when they first started in that garage. But now there is a name, and it has actually been a cornerstone of the HP way. So we've tapped into that over the last 4 years. And to latch on to something that Zara mentioned, so when we separated from that the HP Co, we actually had to create 2 boards. And the board that we created, that our wonderful Chief HR Officer, Tracy Keogh, created for HP Inc., is one of the most diverse boards in corporate America. And it's 45% underrepresented minorities on our board. So it includes women and people of color and all kinds of different diversity. So to your point, I think that really sets the tone from the top of what we intend to do, and it really drives a level of diversity throughout the organization that goes beyond lip service to it. So that's just a little tidbit to get us started. But Steve, how about you from a best practices standpoint? Because I know Oracle has been very committed to this as well. How do you drive diversity and inclusion in your company?
Well, let me start with saying that this topic is tough. And I think any company who's done it well would tell you that there's some tough discussions. When you're really honest about what you're trying to do from a D&I standpoint, it takes time, right? So a lot of what we're starting to do now is to really pay close attention to our pipeline of talent. And I think as you've heard, the way we improve representation is by getting people in, creating an environment where they want to stay. And if they want to stay, we want them to be able to do their best work, not just do their best work, but want to do their best work. And so to the degree that we're able to create an environment like that, then that creates a pipeline for the bigger role so that we have more people in a room like this, right, that are like you, that understand your culture, that understand that they play a role in pulling others through. So we're kind of on, I won't say the very front end of it, but we're kind of moving along that axis right now with our hiring activity. We have 6 employee resource groups. I certainly mentioned Ola, and we've got 5 others. They play a role in helping to keep our employees engaged and have an opportunity to reach out to others and have some penalty-free discussions, because there's certain things as a black man I can ask another black man that no one else can answer. Or as a Latino woman, there's certain things you want to know that I can't answer. We need to create an environment where we can do that. So we certainly got the hiring piece, we've got the engagement piece, and then we're also asking all of our ERGs, which is important, to assist the business in making progress. So let's say if there's a client that requires that we have a client team that calls on them that's bilingual. How do we know? Mm-hmm. Where do we go to start to staff that type of team? How do we know that we have the right people who are not just good with the language, but are conversant in what that customer needs to hear? And one of the best things I saw in a webcast, I think I mentioned this the other week, and this is a webcast on unconscious bias. There was a software development manager who said, you know what, I've got to create code that appeals to a multitude of people in different countries, different environments, different cultures. If my team doesn't reflect that, I don't know how to bring it to market. So for someone like me, and I say all of us here, when we hear senior leaders saying that sort of thing, they can tell the story themselves. I mean, ultimately, that's what you want it to get to. So, as you say, Luciana, if your senior leaders understand this is the way that we do business, some people say theoretically a D&I team would go away, right? Because this is how you do things. That's not what we want. I mean, David and Angelica, now we like having our jobs, don't get me wrong. But I think at some point, if a business does it well, and I'll use one really good example before I get off of it. I had a friend of mine, I don't know how many follow the National Basketball Association, the NBA, right? And she took over as the chief HR officer for the NBA, and I asked her about diversity and inclusion. She said, well, we don't need one. I said, well, what do you mean you don't need one? She said, you see our players, you see our coaches, you see our front offices, you see the audience, and you see that their brand is global. And I said, well, we don't need someone who has that stamp on their forehead. So if you want to use a model organization that says, no, this is how we do business every day. You look at their commercials, right? Yeah. Look at how they use their players. Look at where they show up, how they show up. Anytime you see that brand and you see any real critical mass of players or people in the front office, you stop counting, in other words. Because my colleagues know, I said, when I walk in certain rooms, and I think you all do it too, one of the first things I do is I take a mental count. And I can tell you don't know I'm counting. I can tell you how many other brothers are in the room, right? And we'll probably link eyes, or we'll talk there's just three of us in here. Right? We know that happens. So I think what's really encouraging for us now is that we're putting these things in place where what we're trying to do becomes commonplace, right? It's not just a program, not an initiative. So hopefully that helps some, but that's a lot of stuff to say. We've got these three areas where we really like to focus on: pipeline, engaging our people, and making sure that, especially our ERGs, help the business to do business. I think that's helpful.
I can totally relate to the whole locking eyes thing. So the Brazilians always find each other, and I'm sure that if there are any here today, you're going to come and find me after, because that's what happened last week. So it just so happenstance, Steve and I were both at the same conference last week, which was the Out and Equal conference, Out and Equal Summit in Washington, D.C. At least one other person in this room was there. Someone else just raised their hand. Awesome. Any others who were there? Okay, great. Several of us. One of whom was my esteemed colleague from HP, Martine Stier, who heads up HR for our print organization, which is a large part of our business. And we were joined by 43 colleagues from the HP delegation, which included LGBTQ and allies. And we had several members of our leadership team show up because it is important for us to be vocal and to be present. And in fact, we even conscripted one at the last minute. He was there for a government meeting, but we said, no, Richard, come here. We need you to come over and join us and talk to the folks who are here for Out and Equal. So, which he did gladly, and we had a wonderful informal chat. But to that point around kind of the the responsibility that we all have as leaders and as professionals wherever we might sit within the organization. So I'm using the term leadership broadly because we all show up in a certain way and we all have a point of view that we carry with us. So let me ask you from that standpoint, Zara, what kinds of things are you seeing that at PagerDuty that are contributing to that kind of leadership stance?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's embracing vulnerability to build trust with your team. I think we've all heard about Project Aristotle and with Google, and it's really about creating psychological safety. So for me, when I just think about the leaders that we're trying to build, and we're trying to recreate again what modern leaders look like as we build our sort of a new, different tech company. And vulnerability and building trust is really important. And I'll give you a sample of a story about someone on my team. And I may get a little bit weepy-eyed because it always does this, but so she's Black, and she's worked at all these tech companies, and she is one of my high potentials and the high potential person in the entire company. And she's been there for about 2 years, and I've given her a voice. And she when I gave her feedback at her last performance review, she said, Zara, thank you very much for being vulnerable and giving me feedback and trusting me. I've never had a voice before. And so for me, that's what I want to create. Yeah. And I want every leader to be weepy-eyed like I am right now. But if you can create that experience for one employee, you basically, and you've tapped them. She's a high potential. Like she's a future and learning and development leader in the industry. But she feels like we have been able to create that safety all the way up to the CEO where she can be herself. So that's an example of embracing vulnerability. We have really tough conversations with each other. She'll tell me all the time, I'll be like, why were you breathing like that in the meeting? You're coming off as, and she'll be like, no one's in my life, I know I do it, but no one's in my life has ever told me that. So we have honest conversations. My head of diversity and inclusion will tell me, Zara, the way you said that could come across as this. And we have those conversations all the way up to the CEO level. And we include that in our leadership training, vulnerability. We use a company called Awaken. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of them, but we partner with them. And some of the initial leadership development is like, you need to understand who I am as a person. And there's diversity, over the iceberg, which is you can just look at someone, and then there's under the iceberg, socioeconomic, single parents. There's like so many different layers. And so our leadership development classes start with that.
We talked a lot about that last week too, about this concept of intersectionality, if anyone has heard that idea. And there was something very powerful too that I took away from the conference, which was the CEO of Out and Equal who mentioned it. She said, no one is free unless everyone is free. And I think that's very much the idea that we're that's at the core of why we do what we do. And it's because it's not only the right thing to do, it's where we're going, hopefully, as a species, as a human species. And to Steve's earlier point, ideally there will be one day when we won't need to be to have a diversity and inclusion focus, because that will just be the way things are. But there's still a while to go before we get there. So how do we close that gap is one of the questions, right?
Yeah, can I add something
Please,
to that? There's a colleague of mine who told a story about a meeting at General Electric, and Jack Welch was the CEO at the time. And the meeting was for the African American Network Group at GE, and it was Q&A time. So, as you can imagine, one of the first questions that was asked to Jack, well, Jack, so what are you doing to help blacks to advance at GE? And his answer was, I want all my blacks in the room to stand up. And it was a decent number. He said, ask them. He said, I put them in place. They can hire, they can promote, they can transfer, they can sponsor, they can do all those things that are important to advancement. So as the senior leader, me seeing the importance of it, and as you know, GE is a pretty diverse business. They've got B2B, they've got direct-to-customer, all of that. The question becomes, I think, particularly here, so if you ask that question, what would your answer be? Now, and you answer that amongst yourself. How many times have you heard, and I've heard to my disappointment, some black execs say, well, I don't want to be viewed as a black exec. Well, I got news for you, brother. You are. And we kind of get that whole point that, that doesn't define me, and it doesn't really define what I do at an organization, but if you don't do it, who else should? So if you're a Latino executive, wherever you are, and you can't, in your mind, think about how you have reached back and helped some people. And I think Zara gave an excellent example, but what about that person who's kind of middle of the road, who needs that push, or they've got one foot out the door, and the only person who can save them is you? How many of you have done it? And I think that's a challenge that a number of us who've been in leadership roles really ought to take on, right? So when you leave here today, I guarantee you there are people wherever you work who know that you're here, and they aren't sure exactly what you're hearing, but they hope you come back with something that can help not just you, but can help the organization, because they'll want to know. They want to know they can tap into it. Also heard a Latino exec not too long ago say, well, I don't be known as a Latino exec. Oh, okay. We kind of get what you mean conceptually, but there's to me, a responsibility that we have as people of color, or LGBTQ, or whatever community you belong to connect with people who relate. They may not be able to relate to what you do on a day-to-day basis, but they watch how you lead. They watch how you handle failure. They watch how you interact with people. They watch how you interact with people who are bigger than they are. And I think we have a responsibility as part of what we try to do to build our company's D&I strength and that sort of thing, to see that we do play a special role in that. So it's a long, rambly way to kind of get my point. But I just think that it's incumbent upon us in rooms like this to take back what we've learned and think about those people who are leaning on us to help them.
So that's a great way to get to that question that we wanted to get to, which was if someone in this room is not in a specific D&I role, but you want to get involved, you want to help, what can you do? And hopefully you're already coming up with some ideas on your own. And Steve's point right now is a very helpful one about how everyone can, and your story earlier as well, Zara. Did you have anything else to add on that front?
Yeah, I think we've all heard the term of being an ally, in an allyship, and really, kind of participating and leaning in. So we have we have 6 employee resource groups. One of them is called Array, which is for our Latinx and Black employees, and we have them represent at town hall. They come to town hall, Hispanic Heritage Month. They talked about that. We have sessions around just really helping them understanding what they're going through and career development opportunities. And I would attend an employee resource group. Just listen in. Ask if you can talk to maybe one of the leads of that employee resource group. Just be curious, right? They want more allies and they want more people to be part of the community. It doesn't mean that you have to be Latinx or Black, but you can be an ally and be part of the community and you can help them. So that's what I like to tell a lot of people is just lean in and try and be an ally, because that actually makes a world of difference in your day-to-day interaction.
Very, very nice. So let me pause here and see if any of this has sparked any thoughts or any questions, any insights that any of you may have. And if so, if you can raise your hand, we have a mic runner who is ready to run. Just need to let us know who you are. Okay, we have one right here, and I'll wait for the mic runner to get there because this is being live cast. So we want to make sure everyone can hear us, even if you're not in the room.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Paula. I work at Microsoft. We do have a lot of D&I discussions at the company at this moment. And one of the things that I want to know from you, what do you do to influence your peers? People that are in other roles but have the same power? Because what I notice, and this is not with us, but some people are better than in DNA, DNA, and other ones are not as good.
Yeah.
And even though they try, they make it happen, it's just checking the box. You know that the real feeling is not there.
Yeah.
So how do you work with those people? Because how do you influence them to really see what needs to be done?
That's a great question, and maybe I can start by sharing an example from HP. So one of the things that we've done is we've actually, and we very much see our responsibility as not just being within the company, but also more broadly with the communities where we live and work, and the world at large. And that's true for us from a sustainability standpoint as well as from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. And so a couple of things that we've done is that we have established requirements for companies that work for us, for vendors, for example, from our marketing function or from our legal function, that they have to have the teams that work on our accounts and by extension, then we make an impact more broadly to the company, have to be diverse themselves, or we won't do business with them. And so, we've really drawn a line because, again, we see what we're doing as not just within our 4 walls, but having that kind of ripple effect throughout the rest of the world. Any thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, related to that, it's almost kind of the opposite effect with us. One of the things that we try and help our leaders do is to build what we call diversity action plans. And the first question we ask them is, what do you want to achieve as a business? Let's start there. Because whatever we're going to do from a D&I standpoint needs to be in alignment with that. Otherwise, it becomes a program, right? But if you're trying to grow, let us show you from a D&I standpoint how we can help you to grow. If you need to do more outreach, we can show you how to do that if you're trying to penetrate a market. So when we start from that point of view, we automatically get attention, because now this is, okay, if you're going to show me how I can be more successful and how we can serve our clients, and by the way, to your point, Luciana, what's happening with us now, we're starting to have more and more customers say, well, before I sign this deal, Oracle, I need to know what you do with respect to women or people of color or single mothers, et cetera, et cetera. And I think my colleagues David and Angelica would tell you that, and our boss Tracy Wade, that more and more we get calls that, can you please come and talk with our client or show up and just answer questions, because they want to know. And why is that? Because their stakeholders are holding them accountable, right? So to the degree that we can communicate that, and I'll go back to the Charlotte meeting last year. I don't know how many of you were at the Charlotte HITEC conference, and I remember the Bank of America senior executive said, Brian Moynihan said, look, stop showing me stats, right? I already know that this is important to our customers. This is why we do it. And if I didn't take anything else away from that, that was major to me, that the person who sits at the top had a number of the people in the C-suite on that stage in Charlotte saying, no, I don't need business justification. I got all the business justification I need. People go to banks, right? People need to manage their lives. They need to manage their funds. They need to manage how they grow their families. We can help them do it, but we got to have the right team in place to do that. So that's what's really helped us more now, is the fact that we're being held accountable, kind of to your point, you're holding your stakeholders and your vendors accountable. Makes a big difference when we go forward and talk about a D&I strategy.
I think it's one of the ways that companies are stepping in where governments are failing us, and I think that it's a very important role that companies need to be mindful of, and to really try to understand, what are your values, what do you stand for, because we're going to have more and more of an impact in that way. So I think it's of primary importance to be very clear on that, so that all of the behaviors that you're taking are in sync with what you truly believe. And by the same token, if you're just saying these are our values and you're not acting in accordance with those values, then are they really your values? So when we talk about culture and you know how diversity is built into the culture, it requires taking a stand in some cases, and being very vocal about that, so that it's not just something that you think you believe, but it's something that you actually do.
Yeah, and my company's a big believer in metrics, which I know Oracle and HPR as well. And I think if you're talking about your leaders, some are, you know, are believers that if we create a diverse employee population, our customers will be more successful, our products will be, you know, leading edge. But for those leaders who don't believe in that, I think sometimes you have to kind of maybe meet them where they are and try to understand where they're coming from. Is it because they're too busy, right? Like, is it not something that's important to them? And have an open dialogue if there's someone who can have that open, vulnerable dialogue with them. And I can bet you that they're probably, if you're looking at their employee engagement scores or the quality of their, like a product team, for example, I can bet you that there's something going on there with the data that is telling a different story, that maybe they need to look deeper, and if they had more of a represented population in their organization, that they could be even more successful. So I think those are some of the things that you need to chat with people about. You know, at my company, when I joined, our sales organization only atrociously had 8% females. And I was, you know, but we started with, you know, we need to hire females at all different levels, and it starts with the the pipeline, right, which is the sales development reps, the people who are going to be the sales reps in 5 years. So we've built a diverse pipeline. They're going to be our future leaders. And then we also put in like the middle leaders, like the directors and that. So we have about like 29% female there now. But it takes a long time. And our results improved last year. Like, for example, we had in fiscal year 19, I think it was like 49% growth as a company. And the year before, so we've been able to kind of reap the rewards from that. And I think you can just have to show them the business impact, what's important to them, right? What's in it for them. And you have to find that what's in it for them. And that's sometimes the needle in the haystack.
Great question. Thank you.
Thanks.
There's another one in the back there, if we have the mic somewhere.
Yeah, I have a question.
Someone already has the mic. Okay,
I
so
do
we'll start
have the mic
there, and then
already.
we'll go to you. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. I love this topic. I have so many questions, but I do have one related to the strategy piece. We're talking a lot about the pipeline, and I love that. And this is really directed within the technical lines of business. Sometimes I think and wonder about organizations that put such an emphasis on the pipeline piece, if that's where we should be prioritizing, because data will show right now that it's really leaky. In fact, women are leaving at atrocious rates mid-career. So just curious from that angle, the technical lines of business, some action plans you all are taking or some strategies you could share to help mitigate that, but also to your point too, Luciana, about the intersectionality. So can you address the question to not only women, but women of color, because I do believe they have various and they need to be differentiated.
Yes, great point. I'll let Zara start with that because I know they're doing a lot. You mentioned this on our call last week around how you're building your pipeline and how you're ensuring that you're building diversity into that.
Yeah, so a lot of the time we do talk about the diversity, right, which is the pipeline, but inclusion is just as important. The analogy I always use is you can invite someone to the dance, but you need them to make them feel like they're dancing, right? So.
And I also heard the addition to that, which was that they also get to pick the music.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's such a great analogy that we keep adding to it. Yes, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and so I think from the pipeline is, you need to bring in people from non-traditional areas, right? Because that's how you're going to build so we partner with Code 2040, we partner with HackBright, we also partner with Ball Breakers, so we're bringing in people from non-traditional areas into our organization. And what we realized from an inclusion perspective was that when we're bringing a person with a master's in computer science going through a co-op program at Waterloo, because I think we've all heard of that school, that they're coming in, they're not at the equal level as someone who's coming through these programs. So we actually need to, and this was like an aha for us, which we need to actually ramp these people. It's going to take a longer ramp time.
Yeah.
So we need to provide them with much more structure and much more mentoring and coaching because they're coming in with different experiences. So from making sure that the pipeline, and those are people of color, right, Black and Latinx, and making sure that they feel that they're being properly set up for success. So that's for the pipeline inclusion piece. From an inclusion perspective, this is something we're now just as a company just starting to work on. So we just launched our first inclusion survey 2 weeks ago through Culture Amp. So we use Culture Amp, which is an employee engagement tool. And our head of diversity and inclusion partnered with them to create their first inclusion survey a couple years ago at his former company. So we're not going to find out those results until actually this Friday when it closes. So from that, we're going to actually put concrete actions around feeling included. But for example, at our engineering, if you're looking at the tech side, the engineering all hands meetings, we allow employees to ask any questions. And we have employees who ask about representation, they ask about pay equity, they're asking a lot of tough questions, and our leaders need to understand how to respond to them. They can't shy away from them. So I have an open door policy, all of our leaders have an open door policy, and it's just building that trust, and it takes time. There's no silver bullet to that at all.
And you're lucky that they're asking in the meeting as opposed to on Glassdoor or somewhere else, right? So there's also that ongoing conversation that we need to be having in an open forum.
Yeah, I can give you an example. Like when I joined PagerDuty 2 weeks ago, we were sitting in a room doing focal merit, and this woman was a brown woman, engineer, and we looked at her salary, performance levels, and I was like, why is this woman being paid way less than all the men and other people? And everyone looked at each other and said, I don't know. So we gave her a $20,000 increase to be at par with her peers.
Yeah.
And that was just something we do. Yeah. That's a lot of money, right? Thank you.
Yeah.
And so we look at it all the time,
Yeah.
but for me, that's like, the woman was like so happy that we even thought
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
So we hear this all the time, but
Yeah.
we make and that was my week 6 at the company. I was like, I love this place.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah.
So,
Salary
yeah.
equity is a very important thing at HP as well. We
Yeah.
we do the same thing at a scale that's a little bit bigger,
Right.
but we do look around the world at parity and making sure that that we're compensating people, and where there are outliers,
Yeah.
we also fix them immediately. In addition to learning from what made them the outlier, and how do you build it systematically so that it's part of how we will ensure that it doesn't happen again. So I know we're short on time. I know we started a little bit late though, so I'm hoping that we still have time for that one gentleman who had a question over there that I had said could ask his question. Can we run the mic there? Thank you so much.
Hi, so my name is Mateo, and then Steve mentioned something about like those individuals who are in the middle who don't want to be known as a Hispanic executive or a Black executive. So in parallel to that, how do you empower those who are in the halfway path for those executive roles? How do you empower them to or encourage them to reach those positions rather than just staying in the positions they currently are? And how do you maintain those, how do you keep them there when that sense of belonging is not there?
Yeah, good question. Steve, do you have a thought on that one?
Yeah, certainly, yeah. I think you've heard us say, if nothing else, a lot of this stuff takes time to do over and over again. And one of the things that we're working on now is education of our leaders, starting with kind of a basic unconscious bias training, which how do you think about people, what comes to mind when you think about certain people. Now we're doing something called micro inequities. So how do you apply it? So when we have our succession planning discussions about who is on the launch pad for new jobs, how do we think about them? Who's in the room when we're having those discussions that can bring a different point of view to the table? If we're talking to someone, let's say, who's a member of OLA, right, or our Latino ERG. If there's no one in the room who can talk about what makes that person tick, that might make it difficult for them to make it to the next level. So then they're sitting there going, well, gee, do I even have a chance to compete for these roles? If I don't, number one, I don't know they're thinking about me. Two, if they are they thinking the right sorts of things? Who's helping to advocate for that? So I think there are kind of 2 points to it. We educate, but we also want to encourage, I think, our folks to you got to speak up sometimes. And I would tell this to a lot of Black employees, don't assume that your leaders know what it is you want to do, right? You got to advocate for yourself and let them know, yes, I'd like to compete for these jobs. I'm willing to move. I'm willing to do these things that it takes to go to levels 2, 3, or 4, whatever the case may be. All right, so on one end, we can do some education, but on the other, I have tended to find sometimes in the Latino, Black, and with women, I said, well, if I just do my job, somebody will notice it. And part of that is true, but you have counterparts who let it be known, okay? And listen, I got long stories about when I used to work in executive compensation years ago. I never had a problem getting a return call on that job, trust me. But they would let you know, I don't think I'm getting paid enough, or I should be considered for this. And so I think we've got to trust the process on one end, but the other end, you got to trust yourself and speak up and let folks know. And then I think our job is to make sure we're institutionalizing those sorts of things that'll help make sure you get seen the right way.
Perfectly said.
Yeah.
Last quick thought?
Yeah, and I think for succession planning, when you're in those meetings where you're talking about like who's our future leadership pipeline, as you said, like having someone who's you've spoken up, and then also having a sponsor there too,
That's
right?
right.
Who can talk about all the great things that you've done, your capabilities, and finding ways to help kind of elevate your leadership skills and capabilities. So I think that's really important, is finding a sponsor who can talk about you is critical.
So I wish we could have this conversation forever, but we can't. We need to wrap up. So I'm going to wrap up with one sentence in closing, and I'll go down for one sentence from each of us. So mine, as parting words, I would encourage you to be true to your values when you're thinking about building diversity into your culture. Don't just have values, act on those values.
Yeah, no, I think values are sort of the fundamental, and I think when you're interviewing people, make sure that you integrate them into the interview process, that everyone should be interviewing for the behaviors that you want to create and instill in your organization, and I think that's really important. And each person, I always tell people, if you reach out to one person and just kind of help understand their perspective, right? Because each person brings something to the table, then you've created another, hopefully very strong bridge. So I always try to reach out to someone and I don't know and learn a little bit more about them.
I would say take everything that you've heard today, and I think if leave with this sentence, say it to yourself, I own it. Okay? I own a piece of helping others to get ahead. I own getting the message out to people who may not know it or understand it. I own the change that I want to say. So I say, simply say to yourself, I own it. And let's start there.
Thank you all, and thank you
Thank
for the
you.
great panel.
Thank you.